Welcome to TRN Podcast episode 136. Today we're diving into a really beloved seasonal vegetable, asparagus, or spargel, as many know it. You've shared some fascinating articles with us about, how to buy the freshest stuff and also some common myths that seem to stick around. So our goal today is basically to sift through all that, pull out the most important, maybe surprising insights so every listening can feel like an asparagus expert next time they're shopping. We'll look at how to spot the best quality at the market and tackle some of those long-held beliefs about its properties and how it affects our health.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it, how much lore and maybe some misinformation has built up around what's, well, quite a simple vegetable, really. Why don't we start right at the beginning? What should you actually look for if you want genuinely fresh asparagus?
Okay, let's break down the key points from our sources. Fresh asparagus should be plump, firm, have its sort of glossy sheen, and no cracks. And the tips, the heads, should be closed and firm. What does that actually tell us?
Well, those features are really telltale signs. They mean the asparagus was harvested recently and still has a high moisture content. Cracks, or heads that are already starting to open up, they suggest it's been harvested for a while and, lost some of that freshness.
Right. And what about the ends of the stalks, the cut ends? They're supposed to reveal quite a bit too, aren't they?
Absolutely. The cut ends are critical. They shouldn't look dry at all. Ideally, they should seem moist, maybe even a bit juicy. And, in the best case, they'll even have a pleasant, slightly aromatic smell. Any kind of unpleasant, musty, or sort of foul smell is a definite warning sign. Stay away from that batch. And here's an interesting tip. If you gently squeeze the cut end, a little bit of liquid might come out. Crucially, that liquid shouldn't smell sour at all.
Ah, that's a really practical tip. Good one. Then there's this squeak test you often hear about. What's your take on that?
Right, the squeak test. The idea is that if you rub several fresh stalks together, they should make a squeaking sound. And while some people swear by this as proof of ultimate freshness, it's important to remember that other things matter just as much, like the appearance, the moisture we just talked about. Just because it doesn't squeak doesn't automatically mean it's old. It's just one potential indicator.
Understood. So, okay, we know how to spot fresh asparagus. How do we best store it at home then to keep it fresh for as long as possible?
The key is cool storage. Before you put it in the fridge, though, give it a quick check for any signs of mold spores. You don't want that spreading. Then wrap it in a damp cloth, put it in the vegetable drawer of your fridge. That way it should generally stay good for a day or two without losing much quality.
Okay, great tips for buying and storing. Very useful. But you mentioned myths earlier, the ones that cling to asparagus. Let's tackle the big one first. The claim that asparagus is an aphrodisiac. Is there anything to that?
Ah, yes, that one. Well, this belief actually has pretty deep historical roots going way back. One possible reason might be the vitamin E content in asparagus. Vitamin E does sometimes get linked to libido, but here's the thing. The actual amount of vitamin E you get from eating asparagus is, medically speaking, far too low to have any significant effect. It's much more likely that the phallic shape of the asparagus spear itself contributed more to the myth starting and sticking around. Interestingly, traditional Ayurvedic medicine does use asparagus extracts for related issues, but solid scientific evidence for that kind of effect is still lacking.
So more wishful thinking than science then.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the idea that bitter asparagus is toxic? I've definitely heard people say you should throw it out if it tastes bitter.
That's definitely a myth, and it's completely unfounded. Bitterness can happen, yeah. Maybe it was harvested too close to the root, or perhaps there was a sudden cold snap during its growth. But those bitter compounds, they aren't toxic or harmful in any way. And there's a simple trick to reduce the bitterness when you cook it. Just add a pinch of sugar and a little butter to the cooking water.
That's reassuring. Good to know. What about eating asparagus raw? Lots of people think you absolutely shouldn't. Is that true?
That's another common belief that isn't quite right, at least not as a blanket rule. Actually, the tender tips of really fresh asparagus are perfectly fine to eat raw. They can be a great crunchy addition to salads, for example.
Really?
Yeah.
Surprising. Okay, let's talk about the actual nutritional value then. Is asparagus really as healthy as people often claim?
Yeah.
What's actually in it?
Oh, absolutely. It's packed with good stuff. It's rich in potassium and calcium, which are great for heart health. It also has a decent amount of fiber, which aids digestion, plus vitamin C and folic acid, both important for the immune system. But, looking at the bigger picture, we should mention a caveat. People with gout or kidney problems might need to be careful with asparagus. The reason is it contains purines. The body breaks down purines into uric acid, and high levels of uric acid can cause problems if you have those pre-existing conditions.
That's a really important point for certain groups.
Yeah.
Okay, another phenomenon many asparagus eaters know well is, well, the distinctive urine smell after eating it. Does that actually affect everyone, or is it different from person to person?
Right. Despite what some people think, that change in urine odor after eating asparagus is pretty much universal. It's caused by specific sulfur-containing compounds produced when your body breaks down asparagusic acid, which is naturally present in asparagus. Drinking more fluids can help lessen the smell a bit. And interestingly, that same asparagusic acid also has a diuretic effect, which is why you might find yourself needing the bathroom more often after an asparagus feast.
Huh. Learned something new again. Let's move on to a classic debate. White versus green asparagus. Which one is actually better for you, nutritionally speaking?
There's a persistent myth that white asparagus is somehow healthier, but actually it's more likely the opposite is true. You see, green asparagus grows above ground. It's exposed to sunlight, which means it produces chlorophyll. That's what gives it the green color. And it generally contains more vitamin C as well. Now, white asparagus is still nutritious, don't get me wrong. It provides fiber, iron, various vitamins, beta-carotene minerals, but it's often mistakenly seen as less healthy. What's really telling is the price difference. White asparagus is usually more expensive, but that's not because it's nutritionally superior. It's because the growing method, keeping it covered from sunlight, and the harvesting are much more labor-intensive.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and can you freeze asparagus, to make the short season last a bit longer?
Yes, absolutely. It's a misconception that you can't freeze it. The key is to use very fresh asparagus and peel it before freezing. Then, importantly, freeze it raw. And when you want to use it, cook it directly from frozen. Don't thaw it first. That helps prevent it from getting watery during cooking and preserves most of the flavor and texture.
That's a practical way to extend the enjoyment, definitely. What about if you see asparagus with slightly bluish tips, or tips that are already a little bit open? Is that a sign of lower quality?
No, not really. Bluish tips just mean the asparagus poked through the soil a bit early and got some sunlight exposure. Slightly open tips suggest it was exposed to the sun for a little longer. Neither of these things negatively impacts the taste, even though you might find this asparagus sold a bit cheaper sometimes. So you could actually grab a bargain there without sacrificing flavor.
Good to know. Okay, final question then about availability. Could asparagus actually be grown and harvested all year round?
Unfortunately, no. At least not traditionally in places like Germany, for example. The traditional end of the season, often cited as June 24th, exists for a good reason. The asparagus plants need a sufficiently long rest and regeneration period, about 100 days, to gather strength for the next year's harvest. Without that rest, the yield and quality would suffer. So freezing, as we mentioned, is really the best way to enjoy it beyond its naturally short season.
Well, hopefully next time you're at the market, you'll feel much more confident about picking out the freshest asparagus thanks to our chat. And maybe we've managed to clear up some of those persistent myths surrounding this really popular vegetable. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? How a seemingly simple food like asparagus has gathered such a rich mix of folklore and practical know-how around it. It really makes you wonder where some of these beliefs originally came from and how much tradition influences our food choices even today. Perhaps the next step for anyone interested could be to look into the history of asparagus cultivation in their own local region. Might uncover some interesting stories.